The morning Kyle Reston showed up at Maricopa County Superior Court, he was wearing a $3,000 suit and a smile that said he'd already won. He hadn't. He stepped out of his pearl-white 2021 Tesla Model X, slid on a pair of designer sunglasses, and straightened his tie in the reflection of the courthouse window. Across the parking lot, a man in a plain blue shirt and worn khaki trousers was walking slowly toward the same entrance. No suit, no entourage, just a manila folder tucked under one arm, a slight limp in his left leg, and eyes the color of weathered slate, the kind of eyes that had seen things Kyle Reston couldn't even dream about. His name was Master Sergeant Raymond Kowalczyk, United States Army, retired. And in exactly 4 hours and 17 minutes, Kyle Reston's life was going to come apart like a cheap suit in a rainstorm. Let me tell you about saguaro pines. Not the saguaro pines you'd find in a real estate brochure, though that brochure would have been tempting enough. I'm talking about the real saguaro pines. The one that existed on a quiet Tuesday morning in March of 2019, when the desert sky was the kind of deep blue that makes you believe in something bigger than yourself. Saguaro Pines was a neighborhood tucked into the eastern edge of Chandler, Arizona, a suburb southeast of Phoenix that still held onto its small-town bones even as the city swallowed everything around it. 16 homes on a single curved street called Ironwood Loop, red-tiled roofs, desert landscaping, mature palo verde trees casting lace-thin shadows across driveways in the early morning light. It smelled like creosote and warm stone. It sounded like sprinkler heads clicking on at 5 a.m. and mockingbirds arguing in the mesquite trees and the distant, comforting bark of somebody's lab 2 houses down. The neighbors on Ironwood Loop knew each other by name. They borrowed ladders and returned them. They signed for each other's packages. They brought casseroles when somebody got sick, and they stood in driveways on the 4th of July with sparklers and cold beer, watching the fireworks pop above the South Mountain silhouette. It wasn't perfect, nothing is, but it was close. The people who lived there had mostly been there for years. A retired schoolteacher at number 4, a young couple with twin toddlers at number 9, a landscaper and his mother at number 12. They were the kind of people who kept their yards tidy and their music reasonable and their dogs on leashes, mostly because they respected each other, not because anyone told them to. And at the end of Ironwood Loop at number 16, behind a low stucco wall and a hand-built wooden gate, lived Raymond Kowalczyk. He had lived there for 22 years. And behind that wooden gate was something that would eventually matter enormously, a strip of desert land, 12 feet wide and 104 feet long, running along the entire eastern edge of his property. A strip of land that was, without question, legally and entirely his. Remember that. Master Sergeant Raymond Kowalczyk, Ray to the neighbors, Sarge to anyone who'd served, was 67 years old in the spring of 2019. He'd enlisted in the United States Army in 1974, 3 months after graduating high school in Youngstown, Ohio. He was 17 when he signed the papers. His mother cried. His father shook his hand. He served for 26 years. First assignment, Fort Bragg, North Carolina, then Germany, then a deployment to Grenada in 1983 that he never talked much about. Then Desert Storm in 1991, where he led a combat engineering unit through the Kuwaiti oil fields and came back with a Purple Heart, a Bronze Star with Valor device, and a left knee that would never quite work right again. After that came Korea, then Bosnia, then a final assignment as a senior NCO at Fort Huachuca right there in Arizona, which is how he ended up in Chandler in the first place. He met a woman named Gloria at a church potluck in 1996. She had a laugh that could fill a gymnasium and a garden that was the envy of the entire street. He bought the house on Ironwood Loop because she loved the palo verde tree in the backyard. Gloria died of pancreatic cancer in the winter of 2014. Ray stayed. He had a daughter in Tucson named Patricia who called every Sunday. He had a golden retriever named Sergeant Major, Sarge Major for short, who slept at the foot of his bed and rode shotgun in his F-250 pickup. He had a woodworking shop in his garage that smelled of cedar shavings and machine oil, where he built birdhouses and rocking chairs and small wooden toys that he donated to pediatric ward at Chandler Regional Medical Center every Christmas. He woke up at 5 every morning. He made black coffee in a dented percolator, the same one he'd owned since 1989. He sat on his back patio and watched the desert come alive in the early light, coyotes sometimes picking their way across the wash at the edge of his property, the saguaro cactus throwing long, thin shadows across the red earth. He was not a man who raised his voice. He was not a man who complained. But he was a man who noticed everything. He had spent 26 years in an institution that rewarded observation and punished inattention. He kept a small green notebook in his front shirt pocket always. He'd been doing it since 1974. Dates, times, names, descriptions, what people said, what people did, what didn't add up. Old habit. The neighbors on Ironwood Loop adored him. He helped the school teacher hang her Christmas lights. He taught the twin toddlers, now 6 years old, how to look both ways before crossing the street, standing at the curb with them every afternoon until it became automatic. He brought the landscaper's elderly mother jalapeno cornbread on her birthday because she'd mentioned once 2 years earlier that it was her favorite. He had one rule he lived by. He kept to himself, treated people right, and expected the same in return. He was not a difficult man, but he was a precise one. The moving truck arrived on a Saturday in early April 2019. It wasn't one truck, it was three enormous white trucks emblazoned with the logo of a premium relocation company, the kind of outfit that charges $1,200 an hour and sends a crew of 12 men in matching polo shirts. They pulled onto Ironwood Loop at 7 in the morning, and within minutes they had double parked in front of number 15, the house directly next door to Ray's, and blocked the entire eastern half of the street. The house had been vacant for 5 months, ever since the Delgado family moved to Albuquerque. Ray stood at his front window with his morning coffee and watched. The Tesla came 20 minutes later. Pearl white, 2021 Model X. The Falconwing doors swung open theatrically, and out stepped Kyle Reston, 34 years old, co-founder of a venture-backed software startup called VeloStack that had recently been valued, according to a TechCrunch article that Ray would later find at $340 million. Kyle was tall, gym-built, with the kind of easy confidence that came from never having been truly wrong about anything in his own mind. He wore jogger pants and a fitted quarter zip from a brand Ray didn't recognize, and he had AirPods in both ears before his feet touched the pavement, a detail Ray noted and filed away, because it meant Kyle was the kind of man who was always in the middle of something more important than wherever he actually was. His girlfriend climbed out after him. Her name, Ray would learn later, was Brianna Cassell, 28, a lifestyle influencer with 400,000 Instagram followers and a ring light she apparently traveled with. They stood on the front lawn of number 15, and Kyle swept his arm across the neighborhood, a slow, proprietary gesture, as if he were surveying a territory he'd just acquired. Which in his mind he had. Ray walked out to his front gate to introduce himself. He carried nothing. He offered his hand. Ray Kowalczyk, he said, end of the block, welcome to the neighborhood. Kyle looked at the hand, then at Ray. He didn't reach out. Cool, he said. Listen, do you know if there's guest parking around here? I've got a crew coming and they're going to need somewhere to put their vehicles. Ray paused. There's street parking, he said, just can't block the driveways. Kyle nodded without looking at him, already walking toward the moving trucks. Yeah, okay, we'll figure it out, he said, waving a hand over his shoulder like Ray was a fly he'd already forgotten about. Ray stood at his gate for a moment. He went back inside. He picked up his green notebook. He wrote April 6, 2019, new neighbor number 15, Kyle Reston, no handshake, 7:22 a.m. It took Kyle Reston exactly 9 days to find his first fight. It was a Thursday evening, April 15th, still warm enough in Chandler that people kept windows open after dark. Ray was in his woodworking shop finishing a rocking chair he'd promised to a family at the pediatric ward. Sarge Major was asleep in the corner on an old army blanket. He heard the music at 8:30. Bass, deep chest-rattling bass coming through the shared fence line between number 15 and number 16. He checked the clock. He went back to sanding. By 9:15, the bass was louder and had been joined by voices, a party. It sounded like maybe 24 people. Ray was in bed by 9:30 most nights. It was simply how his body worked after decades of early reveille. He waited until 10:30. Then he pulled on his boots, crossed the yard, and knocked on Kyle's front door. A young man Ray didn't recognize opened it, holding a beer, squinting at him. Is Kyle available? Ray asked. Kyle appeared at the door a minute later, flushed and irritated at the interruption. "Hey, what's the problem?" "The music," Ray said calmly. "It's past 10:30. A lot of folks on this street turn in early. If you could bring it down, I'd appreciate it." Kyle looked at him, that long, flat look that people give you when they've decided you don't matter. "There's no noise ordinance until 11, he said. "You're right," Ray said. "I'm just asking neighbor to neighbor." Kyle leaned against the door frame. "Listen, old-timer, I just paid $1.2 million for this house. I think I've earned the right to have a few friends over." He closed the door. Ray stood on the porch for a moment. He could hear Brianna laughing at something inside. He walked back across the street, sat on his porch, and listened to the music until it finally stopped at 1:17 in the morning. He wrote it all in his green notebook. "Now let me pause here and ask you something. Have you ever tried to be completely reasonable with someone who treats reasonableness as weakness? Someone who looks at your patience and sees a green light to push further? Drop a comment below. Tell me what happened. Because what came next on Ironwood Loop was something that every single person on that street would eventually remember for the rest of their lives." The parties happened 3 more times in April. Ray called the non-emergency police line on the third one at 11:45 p.m. Officers came. Kyle turned the music down. He turned it back up when they left. Ray documented every call, incident numbers, responding officer names, exact decibel measurements. He'd ordered a digital decibel meter from Amazon after the second incident because Ray Kowalczyk did not do anything halfway. But the music was only the beginning. In early May, Ray came out one morning to find a neat line of black garbage bags stacked against his stucco wall on his side. Not Kyle's, his. 4 bags split open at the tops, construction debris spilling out. Broken drywall, old screws, a cracked bathroom tile. Kyle had been renovating his kitchen. Ray photographed everything. He called the city. He filed a solid waste complaint. He stacked the bags back against Kyle's wall and photographed that too. Kyle sent a text from a number Ray didn't recognize. Ray had never given Kyle his number and to this day doesn't know how he got it. The text read, "Relax, it's just trash, get a life." Ray screenshot it, dated it, and added it to a growing folder on his laptop. In June, Kyle bought a second car, a 2020 Porsche Cayenne Black, and he began parking it with remarkable consistency 18 inches into Ray's driveway apron, not blocking it completely. Just enough to make Ray have to angle his F-250 carefully to avoid the bumper, just enough to be intentional. Ray documented it with timestamps, every single time. He had a security camera mounted above his garage, had installed it years ago just for general security. It covered the driveway perfectly. You see, folks at Kyle Reston had moved into a house with cameras everywhere. He just didn't know it yet. Then came the complaint to the HOA. The Saguaro Pines HOA was a fairly quiet organization, dues of $90 a month, a handful of rules about paint colors and lawn heights, run by a board of 5 neighbors who met quarterly in the schoolteacher's living room. Ray had been on the board for 3 years in the early 2000s. He knew everyone on it. Kyle filed a complaint in mid-June alleging that Ray's wooden gate, the hand-built one at the front of his property, was in violation of HOA fence height regulations. The board reviewed it. The gate was 5 feet 9 inches tall. The regulation allowed up to 6 feet. The board dismissed the complaint unanimously and sent Kyle a politely worded letter saying so. Kyle filed a second complaint 2 weeks later, this time claiming Ray's woodworking shop created excessive noise and odor during business hours. Ray's woodworking shop, where he made toys for sick children. The board dismissed that one too. One board member, the landscaper's name was Hector Fuentes, a solid man of 51, called Ray afterward to let him know. "He's looking for something," Hector told him. "I know," Ray said. "What are you going to do?" "Keep watching," Ray said. And then, on a warm Sunday morning in July, Ray came outside to find Sarge Major sitting at the gate, whimpering, his left forepaw cradled against his chest. Ray knelt down. The dog's paw was swollen, no cut, no puncture, blunt impact, like someone had kicked him through the fence slats. Ray drove Sarge Major to an emergency vet on Chandler Boulevard. The diagnosis was a hairline fracture in the third metacarpal, $642. He had no proof, not yet. But he went home, pulled up his exterior camera footage, and spent 2 hours going through the previous 18 hours. At 11:14 p.m. the night before, there was a figure on the sidewalk along Ray's fence line, just outside the camera's best angle but visible, tall, the right build. Ray saved the footage to 3 separate external drives. He wrote in his notebook, July 14, 2019, Sarge Major injured, left forepaw fracture, vet report attached. Possible incident 11:14 p.m., review footage copy B. He did not go next door. He did not say a word. Here's what you need to understand about Gloria Kowalczyk's rose garden. She'd planted it in 1998, the second year they lived in that house. 7 rose bushes along the eastern wall, Queen Elizabeth roses, the kind with big pink blooms that smelled the way you imagine a grandmother's kitchen smells. She tended them for 16 years, fertilized them, pruned them, talked to them. Ray had always suspected, though she denied it. When she died in 2014, Ray kept them alive, watered them every other morning without fail. He wasn't a gardener. He had to look up what she'd been doing with the Epsom salt and the coffee grounds, but he learned. He kept them alive because they were hers, because when they bloomed in April, the smell carried to the back patio where he drank his morning coffee, and for just a moment it was like she was still there. Those roses were on the eastern wall. The eastern wall that backed up against the strip of land running along the edge of his property. On a Thursday morning in August 2019, Ray woke up at 5 o'clock, made his coffee, and walked to the back patio. Where the roses had been, there was nothing. Not cut, not damaged. Gone. Every root ball pulled from the earth, 7 holes in the ground like missing teeth, the soil still loose and dark, done in the night, done with a purpose. Ray stood there for a long time. Sarge Major sat beside him, pressing his flank against Ray's leg. The neighborhood was quiet, sprinklers ticking over at number 12, a mockingbird going through its catalog in the palo verde tree. Ray set down his coffee cup. He walked inside. He sat at his kitchen table. He opened his green notebook. He wrote August 8, 2019, 5:04 a.m., Eastern Garden, all 7 rose bushes removed, Gloria's roses, no debris left on property, taken, deliberate. He closed the notebook. He did not go next door, he did not call the police, he did not raise his voice, there was no one to raise it at. He just sat there for a while. Then he picked up the phone and called a number he hadn't dialed in 3 years. A man answered on the second ring. "Well," the voice said without any other greeting, "I was wondering when you were going to call. Now, if you think Raymond Kowalczyk is going to let this go, if you think any of this has gone unplanned or unprepared, then you've never spent any time around a man who spent 26 years in the United States Army, and you've definitely never met a man like Ray." Here's what nobody on Ironwood Loop knew at the time. And here's what Kyle Reston, with all his venture capital and all his TechCrunch press and all his $3,000 suits, had absolutely no idea about. The strip of land along the eastern edge of Ray's property, 12 feet wide, 104 feet long, had been legally part of his deed since the day he bought the house in 1997. It was listed in the original survey. Parcel number 300-340-4016B, Maricopa County Assessor's Records. Quiet, unmarked desert land that abutted the rear corner of what was now number 15. When the Delgado family owned number 15, they'd asked Ray once if they could plant a hedge along that strip. Ray had politely declined. It was his land. He didn't make a fuss. He just said no thank you, and that was that. When Kyle Reston bought number 15 in April 2019, he apparently looked at that strip of open desert land, decided it was vacant and therefore unowned, and moved forward with plans that nobody had consulted Ray about. Specifically, a pool. Kyle had filed for a permit with the city of Chandler in July 2019 for a custom swimming pool and surrounding patio structure. The proposed footprint, according to city records that are public and accessible to anyone who asks, extended 4 feet and 3 inches into parcel 300-344-016B. Ray's land. Ray had noticed the survey stakes going in back in June, small orange-flagged wire stakes that appeared one morning along what Kyle apparently believed was his property line. Ray had measured from his own survey markers. He knew immediately. He'd said nothing. He'd simply taken photographs, documented the date, and called his attorney. His attorney was a woman named Sandra Yee, 61 years old, a property law specialist in Phoenix who had been practicing for 33 years. She was also the wife of Ray's former company commander, Colonel James Yee, who was now playing golf 5 days a week in Scottsdale. Sandra Yee had handled Ray's property documentation pro bono out of respect for her husband's old NCO, and she was, by every account, one of the most methodical and unforgiving attorneys in Maricopa County. Here's what else nobody knew. The man Ray had called that Thursday morning, the voice that answered on the second ring, was a former Army Criminal Investigation Command special agent named Dennis Parrish, now a senior investigator with the Arizona Attorney General's Financial Crimes Unit. And Dennis Parrish had been quietly interested in Velo Stack for about 4 months. Not because of anything Ray had told him. Because of something Velo Stack had done with its investor disclosure documents that had attracted the attention of the Securities and Exchange Commission in January of 2019, 3 months before Kyle moved to Ironwood Loop. A startup valued at $340 million, investor capital from 11 different funds, and a set of quarterly disclosures that, according to 2 separate forensic accountants, contained projections that were, the polite word is optimistic, the less polite word is fraudulent. Ray had mentioned Kyle's name to Dennis in a conversation back in May, just in passing, the way you'd mention a difficult neighbor, and Dennis had gone very quiet for a moment. Kyle Reston, Dennis had said, lives next door to you. He does, Ray said. There had been a pause. Keep that notebook current, Dennis had said. Ray had kept it very current. Now let me pause here for a moment because I want you to think about something. Kyle Reston spent 4 months harassing a man he thought was just a quiet old veteran with a limp and a dog. He destroyed property. He filed false complaints. He took something irreplaceable. And the entire time he had no idea that the man next door had a folder on his laptop, 3 external backup drives, a property attorney on speed dial, and a personal connection to a state financial crimes investigator who already had his name on a case file. You see, folks, when a man who spent 26 years in military service decides to be patient, that patience is not weakness. It is preparation. Sandra Yee filed a civil encroachment lawsuit against Kyle Reston on August 19, 2019, 11 days after the roses were destroyed. The suit alleged willful encroachment on parcel 300-344-016B, destruction of property, specifically 7 established rose bushes with documented sentimental and horticultural value, harassment, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and tortious interference with peaceful enjoyment of property. The damages sought $847,000 plus attorney's fees and costs. She also filed for an emergency injunction to halt all construction on the pool project, pending resolution of the boundary dispute. The injunction was granted in 72 hours. The pool construction, which Kyle had already paid $230,000 to begin, stopped cold. And Dennis Parrish, with a warrant signed by a Maricopa County judge, sat down with Kyle Reston's Velo Stack financial documents the following week. It was a Wednesday morning in October 2019. The desert air was sharp and cool, the kind of October morning in Arizona when the sky is the color of old china and you can smell the creosote sharp and clean after an overnight rain. The kind of morning that makes Ironwood Loop look like a painting. Ray was on his back patio at 5:15, black coffee, the percolator ticking on the counter inside. Sarge Major pressed against his leg. The yard was quiet. The 7 holes in the earth along the eastern wall were still there. Ray had not yet replanted. He was waiting. At 6:41 a.m., the first vehicle turned onto Ironwood Loop. A Maricopa County Sheriff's Office cruiser, then another, then a dark blue Ford Expedition with government plates, the kind that doesn't need to announce what it is because the antenna array on the roof says it plainly enough. Then a second Expedition, then a silver sedan with two men in suits in the front seat. And behind that, a white pickup truck from the City of Chandler Public Works Department. They parked in a line in front of number 15. Ray did not go to his front yard. He sat on his back patio and drank his coffee. At 6:49, he heard Kyle Reston's front door open. He heard voices, measured, official, the unmistakable flat cadence of law enforcement delivering unwelcome news. He heard Kyle's voice go through 3 distinct stages, confused, then indignant, then something quieter. Hector Fuentes from number 12 stepped outside in his work clothes and stood in his driveway. The schoolteacher, her name was Dorothy Ames, opened her front door and watched from behind her screen. The couple with the twins stood together at their window. Kyle Reston came outside in a gray velo stack quarter-zip and athletic shorts, barefoot, holding a cup of coffee. He had clearly not expected anyone at 6:49 in the morning. The lead officer from the sheriff's office handed him a document. A process server standing slightly behind the officers handed him a second one. A man in a dark suit, Dennis Parrish's colleague from the AG's office, handed him a third. The third document was a subpoena for Velostack's complete financial records, all of them. The first document was the court order halting all construction on his property pending resolution of the encroachment lawsuit. The second was a notice of lease pendens, a legal recording against the title of number 15, meaning Kyle could not sell that house, could not refinance it, could not do anything with it until the lawsuit was resolved. His $1.2 million asset frozen. The City of Chandler pickup truck pulled around back. The fence Kyle had installed along the eastern edge of his property, 300 linear feet of cedar board fence, built 2 months earlier without notifying Ray, had been permitted, it turned out, based on survey documents that his contractor had submitted with an error. An error that placed the fence 4 feet and 3 inches inside parcel 300-340-4016B. City inspectors had found this when Sandra Yee's office filed the encroachment complaint. The city crew began removing the fence at 7:03 a.m. Kyle Reston stood on his front lawn in bare feet and watched. At some point, Brianna came outside. She looked at the vehicles. She looked at Kyle. She went back inside. She did not come back out. Ray Kowalczyk sat on his back patio and listened to the sound of that cedar fence coming down, post by post, in the sharp October morning air. He poured himself a second cup of coffee from the percolator. Sarge Major's tail thumped against the patio tile. At 8:45, Ray's phone rang. It was Sandra Yee. "They've served everything," she said. "The city's about 60% done with the fence removal. You should also know that Kyle's attorney, he hired one about an hour ago, apparently called him in a panic, has already reached out to discuss settlement." "What did you tell them?" Ray asked. "I told them," Sandra Yee said, "that my client is drinking coffee on his porch and is not in any particular hurry." Ray looked out at the 7 empty holes along his eastern wall. "That's about right," he said. By 9:30 a.m., the government vehicles were gone, the city truck was gone, the cedar fence was gone, stacked in pieces on Kyle's driveway. Ironwood Loop was very quiet. Hector Fuentes walked over to Ray's front gate around 10. He stood there a moment. "You okay?" he asked. "Fine," Ray said. Hector nodded. He didn't ask anything else. He was that kind of man. Dorothy Ames left a covered dish on Ray's porch around noon, chicken and rice. A note tucked underneath said, "We knew all along, Ray, nothing more." Brianna Castle's car, a 2020 Mercedes GLE, was gone from the driveway by 3 in the afternoon. Her ring light was loaded into it, 3 suitcases, a rack of clothes still in dry cleaning bags. She did not knock on any neighbors' doors on the way out. Kyle stayed. For a while. He appeared less. The Tesla stayed in the garage. The Porsche stayed in the garage. Contractors stopped coming. The pool hole, the partially excavated cavity that had been dug before the injunction, sat open and useless in the backyard, filling slightly with rainwater when the October storms rolled through. Neighbors on Ironwood Loop talked quietly the way people do. They weren't gloating exactly, but they were not pretending nothing had happened either. At the quarterly HOA meeting in November held, as always, in Dorothy Ames' living room, Kyle Reston's seat was empty. He had been invited, he did not come. The board discussed the situation briefly and professionally. They noted that the 2 HOA complaints Kyle had filed had been frivolous and had cost the association administrative time. They voted to formally document that in the minutes. Ray was not at the meeting. He was in his woodworking shop finishing a set of small wooden animals, a giraffe, an elephant, 2 rabbits for the pediatric ward Christmas donation. Sarge Major slept on the army blanket in the corner. The cedar shavings smelled the way they always had. The civil lawsuit settled in March 2020, 14 months after Kyle Reston had pulled into Ironwood Loop with his 3 moving trucks and his AirPods and his proprietary sweep of the neighborhood. The settlement amount was not $847,000. It was just over $1.1 million. Because Sandra Yee, being Sandra Yee, had added to the original filing during discovery, specifically when security camera footage from Ray's system showed, with crystalline clarity, Kyle Reston at 11:14 p.m. on July 13th walking along Ray's fence line, and with a deliberate, unhurried kick striking Sarge Major's paw through the slats. That footage added an animal cruelty finding to the civil record. It added another defendant briefly, Kyle's contractor, who had falsified survey documents to obtain the fence permit and settled separately for $44,000 in fines and professional sanctions. Kyle Reston sold number 15 that June. The lease pendants had been lifted as part of the settlement and he needed the liquidity. He listed it at $1.15 million. He got $1.03. He lost money on the house. The Velo stack matter was more complicated and took longer. The SEC investigation, which had been parallel and entirely separate from the Ironwood Loop situation, concluded in late 2021. Velo stack was found to have materially misrepresented projected user growth metrics in disclosures to 11 investment funds. The company paid a civil penalty of $4.7 million. Kyle Reston, as co-founder and then CEO, was personally fined $800,000 and barred from serving as an officer or director of any SEC-registered entity for 7 years. Velo Stack itself was acquired at distressed valuation in early 2022 by a larger tech company that gutted and absorbed it. The $340 million valuation became, in the end, a $62 million transaction. Kyle Reston moved to a condo in Scottsdale. There are no reports that his neighbors find him particularly neighborly. As for Ironwood Loop, Ray planted new rose bushes in the spring of 2020. He tracked down the exact cultivar, Queen Elizabeth roses, available through a heritage nursery in Tucson. His daughter Patricia drove up from Tucson and helped him plant all 7. It was a Sunday, the desert was warming up. Sarge Major, his healed paw long forgotten, ran slow laps around the yard. Patricia looked at the 7 new plants in the dark earth along the eastern wall and put her arm around her father's shoulders. "Mom would have liked these," she said. Ray looked at them for a long moment. "She would have said I planted them too close together," he said. Patricia laughed. The mockingbird in the paloverd tree ran through its whole catalog, start to finish. The new family that moved into number 15 that fall, a couple in their 40s, she was a nurse, he was a high school history teacher, brought a bottle of bourbon next door to introduce themselves. Ray shook both their hands. Their names, they said, were Marcus and Linda Webb. "Welcome to the neighborhood," Ray told them. He meant it. So that's the story of Ironwood Loop. Of a man who built furniture for sick children and kept a green notebook in his shirt pocket and tended roses that belonged to a woman he still loved. Of a man who was mocked, provoked, violated, who had something irreplaceable taken from him in the dark of night, and who responded not with rage but with patience, with documentation, with the quiet, methodical precision of someone who spent 26 years learning that the battle is never won by the loudest voice in the room. Let me ask you something, and I want you to really think about it before you answer in the comments. How many times in your life have you confused someone's quiet with weakness? How many times have you looked at a patient person and assumed that patience meant they didn't care, that they wouldn't push back? Because here's what Kyle Reston never understood about Raymond Kowalczyk. He saw a 67-year-old man with a limp and a dog and a woodworking hobby. He saw an obstacle, something between him and whatever he wanted. He did not see a man who had spent 26 years being trained, above all else, to read a situation accurately. He did not see the notebook. He did not see the cameras. He did not see the attorney. He did not see the connections, the patience, the plan. He saw what he wanted to see because men like Kyle Reston only ever see what confirms what they already believe. And what he believed was that he was the most important person on Ironwood Loop. He was wrong. The most important person on Ironwood Loop was the man at the end of the block who knew every neighbor's name, who brought jalapeno cornbread on birthdays, who taught 6-year-olds to look both ways at the curb, who tended his late wife's roses every other morning without fail. That was the most important person. And he was there long before Kyle Reston arrived. And he was there long after Kyle Reston left. So let me leave you with this. Never mistake a quiet man for an idle one. Never mistake patience for permission. Never look at a veteran who has lived through more in a single deployment than most people face in a lifetime and assume that because he isn't shouting, he isn't watching. He is always watching. And he has a notebook. If this story meant something to you today, if it reminded you of someone you know or something you've been through or someone you want to honor, leave a comment. Share it with somebody who needs to hear it, because stories like this one aren't really about revenge. They're about what it means to hold your ground when everything in you wants to let go. They're about what it means to be the kind of neighbor, the kind of person that a street like Ironwood Loop actually deserves. Take care of yourselves out there. And take care of your neighbors. This story is inspired by real events and public court records. Names, locations, and specific details have been changed or dramatized for storytelling purposes. Any resemblance to real individuals is coincidental.